have with us today from the Cape Cod National Seashore, Superintendent George Price. George, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
And we also have Maureen Burgess, who's a select person from the town of Truro and a representative from Truro to the Seashore Advisory Commission. So thanks for coming in, Maureen.
You're welcome.
So we're going to try to hit on some of the issues of the National Seashore. And it's truly a gem for the whole Cape. Maureen, I think, if I'm not mistaken, when they did a survey, or I don't know if it was a referendum or what, years ago before the park was established, I think 80% of the Truro residents were against it. Is that correct?
That's
80%?
I was not here then, but from what I hear, there was a lot of contention about whether or not Truro wanted to be part of it, and it was quite a battle.
Yeah. So there's some issues. It's a unique park. There's, I think, 4.5 million visitors a year, which is up there for national parks. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal recently that talked about the national parks, basically because of the anniversary. But they didn't list Cape Cod as one of the top 10 for attendance.
I think if I'm right, George, it's like the 14th most
I
popular.
thought it was higher than that because some of the ones they had on the list had 3.5, 4 million visitors. And I said, wait a minute, Cape Cod has 4.5 million. Why wasn't it on there?
Well, some people can complain they're prejudiced towards the big Y parks, you know, Yosemite, Yellowstone, that sort of thing.
It was dealing with the private land plots within the park, and I think there's 200 plots.
I think there's about 210. About 210 private residences.
Okay, so now the park is asking, and I think the town is looking at whether we can put restrictions on building in the park.
Well, actually, Jack, there is sort of a grassroots effort started by two citizens who are concerned about the vulnerability of some 153 sites which have currently, there's no restriction on the size, there's no cap on the size of houses. Mm-hmm. So if we have a number of houses that are under 25,000 square feet, let's say, 2,500 square feet rather, right now they could, if they decided, without any zoning restrictions within the Seashore District, they could be enlarged greatly. And a lot of folks are very concerned about losing the Cape Cod character and having these places be, replaced by mansions, mega mansions. So there is, right now, this effort has been started, and there's a proposal to the zoning board. To the planning board, to see if we can get an amendment prepared for the next town meeting to actually see if we can get a vote on whether people feel there should be a restriction on the size of houses within the Seashore District.
Okay. I mentioned earlier when we started that Maureen is the representative from Truro to the Cape Cod National Seashore on the Advisory Commission.
Correct.
So that, I understand, has representatives from what, the 5 towns that are involved?
The 6 towns, the county, the state, and the Secretary of the Interior.
Okay. And
we meet about every other month except for the summer.
Okay, so as your role on that board, you're involved in, you're also a select person, so.
Yeah, I was actually on the board on the Cape Cod National Seashore Advisory Commission, I guess since 2011, and I only became a selectman in 2014. So although I couldn't serve on 2 boards in town, because this is not a town board, I was allowed to continue to be on the advisory commission, which I enjoy very much. So our role is sort of a liaison between the towns and the national park. And we are advisory when the superintendent asks for our advice on certain issues. One you may remember was the dune shacks in Chatham. Other things like the dune shacks in Provincetown, the shacks in Chatham rather, or the dune shacks in Provincetown. He will ask for our input, and we will give him opinions on what what our opinions are.
Okay, so what are those commercial properties? A couple of examples.
Campgrounds, the restaurant up in North Truro, Montilio's. Montano's.
There's a gas station.
Yes,
a gas station.
It is. And
I guess my view was if you're going to change it, restrict building in the park. Do it in town also.
Well, could I speak to that?
Sure,
That
it's
has
your
been
role.
tried by planning boards in the past to
Yeah.
have it town-wide, and it hasn't worked.
It's not going to work, huh?
So the
Yeah.
two, I mean, I think many people agree with you, or we're very concerned about the trophy houses, and Patty Page would not have been singing about those when she sang Old Cape Cod, I'm sure. But the two folks that started this movement towards, decided to restrict this potential amendment just to the Seashore District because, as George said, we're the only town that hasn't dealt with the guidelines
Doesn't
and,
have a zoning, yeah.
you know, in that regard
Right,
with
yeah.
house size. So,
Have we created a monster here in the sense that we created the scarcity? I mean, by establishing the National Seashore and taking all this land and leaving, I guess, 600 semi-private parcels in there, over time they become, there's no more of them. You know, as a matter of fact, they're dwindling, right? The park bought some of them.
Well, we've had over 2,000 land transactions since '61, but those were very prescribed in the legislation as to why the seashore would actually take those.
you know, Jack, there's a concern that some of the folks who have the money to put those McMansions, like on the cliffs along the bay, now with the erosion problem, may be saying, it'd be better to be in the park rather than right on the bay or right on the seashore.
Yeah.
So it's another reason that many of us are concerned.
Salt marshes, by their nature, move with sea level, and when you have a road or whether you have a sharp dune or a brick wall, then they're truncated. So eventually, that marsh is just going to be totally flooded and not function as a marsh in the future.
So we lose the buffering that the marsh, produces and prevents more
Right.
damage. And as the sea level rises, there are certain marsh grasses that will not survive the sea level rise.
Right.
Right.
And so then there is this receding effect. And then, of course, they run up against infrastructure.
Right,
So
right,
it's a big problem because we're losing that buffering effect.
Mm-hmm.
I was
Truro.
just going to say that Truro will be one of the stakeholders along with Wellfleet and the National Park Service in signing a memorandum of understanding about how to proceed with the adaptive management plan. So that's where we are right now. We're
Right.
about to move from the planning to the implementation stage.
What would you like to say to the viewers about
I-
what you're working on with the advisory board and also with the property restriction zoning?
I just really wanted to jump in as an advocate for the birds based on your last question. The roseate terns this is a major staging area for them, and they're going to take a long journey, and they've had their babies, and they really need to be protected. Flushing those parents away could make it impossible for these young fledglings to build up the strength they need to take off for parts for the winter. So, and if you've ever been with piping plovers and you've seen how hard their lives are, I think you would have a lot more, anyone would have a lot more compassion to seeing why they should be protected. So I'm a big advocate for
Big
the birds.
advocate.